Hey, what's up? It's Jim, and today I'm going to talk about Mars Attacks from 1996. And this was a winner of my Patreon movie review vote. If you'd like for me to review a movie of your choice, then click on the link below and pledge, and maybe I'll be reviewing your movie next month. And this winner was selected by Austin. This I sort of have a bit of a history with, because in 1996, I saw this at a sneak preview. I got a pass from a comic book store, and my dad, myself, and I think a couple of my friends, I forget whom, I think my friend Evan, maybe other people, I'm sorry if I forget, it was a long time ago, but I remember coming out and feeling that it was the best movie of 1996. I don't know if I still feel that way, but I felt very passionately about this movie and how silly and ridiculous it was, in particular being opposed to the movie that all film work people at the time had to hate for some reason, Independence Day. I think this movie has a very obvious juxtaposition to Independence Day because it is an alien invasion movie that happened in the same year. They came out at the other big movie-going holiday season. But I always like this more because it's based on sort of B movies. Now, the film Tim Burton had made before this was Ed Wood. And I think there is a noticeable, obvious dip in quality in Tim Burton's work after Ed Wood. But I still sort of like this and Sleepy Hollow, even though, yes, they are not as good as the other stuff that came before it. But it's a lot better than what came after it, except for Big Fish. I think we all like that one. And, Frank Winnie's underrated. But this was sort of Tim Burton's attempt at making a B movie, making a film like Ed Wood because he'd made Ed Wood. Now, I had heard a long time ago from someone who worked with Tim Burton in CalArts and knew him, and felt that Ed Wood was sort of the pinnacle of him creatively in everything Tim Burton wanted to accomplish. And that is why all his films got noticeably worse, because the auteurism that he was working towards suddenly sort of reached its peak, and he didn't really know where to go from there. Now, I'm not saying he's right, but Look, did you see the rest of his filmography? Because, yeah, it's definitely true. But this feels like he's like, well, I did like doing Ed Wood. I like Ed Wood. I like B sci-fi films. I like this sort of thing. I can just parlay that into Mars Attacks. And it feels like somebody who became one of the most successful directors in Hollywood and clearly likes that success, but didn't know where to go artistically, and kind of just picked the exact thing he was working on and hoping it sort of worked out for him. And I sort of get why they thought that. It was the 90s. It was very cynical. This is a very cynical movie. You'd think the public was into that. Turns out, no. The public was not interested in that. They weren't into cynical ideas, and they liked their Irwin Allen action movie sort of riffs to be genuine and heartfelt and pro-America and all the stuff Independence Day is, whereas Mars Attacks is cynical and silly, and people say the wrong things sometimes, and has a way too big of a cast, and there's too much going on, and honestly, cohesive-wise is less of a movie and more of Tim Burton setting up things. It's also based on a bunch of trading cards, and so you kind of get what you get with this, but I still kind of think it works in its own kind of milieu of stupid silliness of a movie that really probably shouldn't exist, but sort of does, and a director who suddenly lost his way and is trying to make sure it doesn't slip through his fingers. You get something as magical as Mars Attacks. Mars Attacks is based on the Topps trading cards. Mars Attacks was Martians basically come and attack Earth. Everyone from around America, the South somewhere in a trailer park, to the White House, to Vegas, to DC, to all these different people from all sorts of walks of life, played by Jack Nicholson in two different roles, Annette Bening, Danny DeVito, Lee Portman, Lucas Haas, the lady who is the lawyer person in Beetlejuice. She's the grandma. I didn't realize that till now. I don't know. There's a lot of people in this. Jodan Baker, Jack Black. I might have repeated somebody. Rod Steiger, Sylvia Sidney. That's her name. Sorry. Now Lucas Haas, Tom Jones, Rod Steiger, Michael J. Fox, Sarah Jessica Parker, Martin Short, Pierce Brosnan, right after doing Bond, Glenn Close, and I'm sure 20 people I forgot. And they're all being attacked by Martians and hopefully going to find their way out of Martians taking over the Earth as why these Martians are here. Who knows, but they're creating all sorts of chaos, and the humans sort of have to try to survive as the Martians destroy Earth. This was based on, there are 2 trading cards that came out as Dinosaurs Attack and Mars Attacks, I believe. And Tim Burton originally was more of a fan of Dinosaurs Attacks, but felt that, Jurassic Park had just come out, and he had tried to get Jurassic Park in that huge bidding war that Spielberg eventually won. He was like Warner Brothers person, apparently. He still sort of had interest in that, but he thought, well, the original idea was they were developing was to do Dinosaurs Attack and then Mars Attacks as a sequel, and I guess they thought, well, we can't do dinosaurs, let's do Mars and stuff. Mars Attacks was, and probably why I got to go because of a comic book store pass, the trading cards had been put out in like various comics and collections at the time, so I was aware, even though I didn't grow up with Mars Attacks, which was a trading card in like the 50s and 60s and stuff, I was aware of Mars Attacks before this movie. It wasn't an obscure thing to me, and I had even seen like on the Sci-Fi Channel's news show, I believe Sci-Fi Buzz went over it years before this, so it was like a thing I knew about, and a lot of my friends knew about it at the time, even if we didn't. I don't think any of us like were into Mars Attacks specifically, but it was an obscure thing to most people, unless you were going to comic book stores, which was a lot of people in the 90s. To be fair, it was one of the biggest eras of comic book buying since the Great Depression, so I totally understand why they might have thought there was a bigger audience, but also I think Tim Burton wanted to do something goofy and silly and had a lot of power to do that, and he did try to sort of purposely make a B movie. In some places you could say this is pre when people would be like ready to made cult movies that you'd see in the late 2000s, and he was pre that kind of era. I think what Tim Burton's trying to honestly do is parlay what he was doing with Ed Wood into something else, but he had so much power and could work with so much people. This book goes from being a weird, odd experiment into being a weird, odd experiment that becomes a major studio venture. There was actually competition between this and Independence Day, and I've heard stories of that Drew McWeeny and Harry Knowles back in the when Ain't It Cool News really blew up days. Drew McWeeny thought Mars Attacks was the better script and was going to be the hit, and Harry Knowles thought Independence Day was going to be the hit, had the better script. And I'm kind of more with Drew McWeeny. In general, I think we all should be more with Drew McWeeny. I think it speaks to the kind of 2 sensibilities of the time. I think the 90s was sort of going through a shift. Now the 90s are sort of more known for like 98, 99, when you had like NSYNC, the Backstreet Boys. They weren't really popular in America until around then. It was kind of like you had the cynical grunge gangster rap era, and then in 96 it's like Tupac died in that fall. Kurt Cobain obviously had been dead for a little bit, but the cynicism was sort of dying out. It wasn't as cool, and as much as people say 9/11 ended that, like the poppy, happy kind of late 90s of American Access and people buying CDs and stuff hadn't just hit yet, but you had things like the popular things like No Doubt, and the ska stuff was coming up, and I'm not just talking about music here, but culturally things were shifting, and I think Mars Attacks probably looked better in 1994 than it did in 1996. They just didn't see, the shift was not as immediate back then because you didn't have things like, now we have social media, these things can be a little more organic, people can speak on them, but you're sort of like at the behest of the giant media corporation, and if you sort of rejected one of those things, they would sort of move on. And I think that's sort of what ultimately happened with Mars Attacks. Like you look at like December 96 or later 96, movie wise, I feel like Beavis and Butthead got to be the big kind of like fun, cool kind of cult movie from this, and Mars Attacks, which had more money in it, I liked it. I like both those movies, but and I watched them both a ton of times. Beavis and Butthead sort of like got in there right at the end. They were still well regarded. This was a little too weird to weird cult movie sensibilities. I also think like Tim Burton's sort of a weird choice for this because like, yes, he likes some of that spookier, weirder stuff, but I think like as we've seen through the rest of his filmography, he has these certain weird sensibilities, but he doesn't seem to have a deep bench love of that many movies. Like, you know, it's like Tim Burton's like known as being creative and interesting, but like if you really think about it, it's like he seems to have like a real limited view of media, let's say. And I think like this pushed that as far as it can, even though it has things like Earth vs. Flying Saucer references and Ray Harryhausen and stuff like that. Originally, The Martians were supposed to be stop motion. As soon as I heard that, I thought like, well, that's bullshit. We got this CG stuff. I like the cartooniness of the CG guys, and the budget would have been insane. And I know he had some conversations with Henry Selick, but the budget would have been too high, so they went with CG. I think what I've always liked about this is it is very cynical 90s style. Like the Tom Jones thing specifically is Tom Jones, the joking of like Tom Jones was going on a lot in the 90s. This cast, you get Pam Grier like a year before Jackie Brown, you get Jim Brown, you get Jack Nicholson, 2 roles. Apparently he wanted to play like everyone at certain points, but Tim Burton just had him do the 2. I don't know if he's great in the other role. Probably Danny DeVito should have been that role, and Jack Nicholson could have just done a smaller role in the other one. Most people don't understand why he's playing just 2. Why not play more? Why not play this? Why not do that? Like, it seems like nobody likes that he played 2. Is it a Doctor Strange reference as everyone's transposed? I don't think so. It seems like this is more the Jack Nicholson who worked for Roger Corman, who helped write the Monkees movie Head. That's what's going on here. To me, it's like, I think this probably would have been better with Joe Dante, but if Joe Dante had Jack Nicholson, he would do more Roger Corman-y weird stuff, but like Tim Burton's just autoristically Tim Burton. He doesn't necessarily reference things that aren't like certain Vincent Price things and Frankenstein stuff. So I think like that hurt it. But I do really have a lot of fun with this movie. I still think it's strange and weird and this kind of like sci-fi Irwin Allen thing that I was very into the Sci-Fi Channel at the time, which was playing a lot of pilots from the 70s that never went anywhere, a lot of weird TV movies, a lot of Irwin Allen stuff as well. And I think when I watch this, it reminds me of that, but it's like funny and strange. I was just getting into Mystery Science Theater at the time. So to me, it's perfect and like kind of crystallized in that era. And reminds me of like watching this, like we had it so many times when my mom would laugh when Tom Jones was on and stuff. His Tom Jones stem was like a joke. To me, like Tom Jones is always like, not unusual to be loved by anyone. Like I always remember that song, but to me, he was always like someone referencing a joke, but I never understood. I didn't grow up with him as a person, you know, other than him being a joke in these things. It's sort of like a lot of my nostalgia for the 70s is through the 90s for a lot. That's how I got introduced to like Shaft. There's a lot of Shaft references and like The Tick and Fresh Prince and like constantly, and then they remade Shaft eventually. But you know, Jim Brown's part I've always liked. That's probably like the real heart of the movie. He's the only one who can somehow manage to play genuine. Everyone else is over the top. Annette Bening is, Jack Nicholson, Glenn Close being in 2 patriotic roles in like I think 6 months with each other. She's like the vice president in Air Force One. There's no vice president in this. That never bugs anyone. Michael J. Fox plays a jerk in it pretty well. Apparently, he was sort of having kind of tremors at the time, so they had to sort of find a way to shoot around it. He used it in his performance for reactions and stuff, so he could get that to work, and then didn't really do as much movie stuff after this. Sarah Jessica Parker actually has an early kind of role with the guy who's played Stedman on Sex and the City is her like executive in this, but they never share screen time together, interestingly. So they would go on to be friends on Sex and the City, but kind of interesting. I found that to be odd. I was like, huh. So anyone, I never hear that brought up. Pierce Brosnan kind of being silly, and right after Bond and Rod Steiger and like so many people. What I take from this is that this was a weird, interesting kind of artistic experiment. I don't know if it works for everyone. I think it worked for a 13-year-old who liked Weird Al and Mad Magazine and reading comic books and watching Mystery Science Theater. I think it's great for that, and I remember it for that only. But I sort of get like why it's disregarded, but I like it. It has a real kind of love for that kind of era that like Tim Burton was a part of, that cynicism of the world, like that everyone was stupid kind of thing. And I think it sort of works in that 90s milieu. I also think like the general public was both sick of that, and I think this goes like too far into it. But there are like funny moments, like when Ray J's in this also. Him and his brother are because they're always like, oh, there's a tour in the White House, which that joke, I guess, doesn't work as well. But there's this part where, like, the 2 kids were like, stop gawking around and protect the president. And, like, I remember the audience thought that was really funny that I saw them with. Had a good time. I had a really good screening of Mars Attacks, and I really loved it. I think I still like it for nostalgia's sake. It is kind of a weird offshoot Tim Burton's filmography. I think most people just sort of stop at Ed Wood, and, like, I think this goes well with it. I'm not going to say this is better than Ed Wood or the classic 90s period. I don't think it is. But I think it's a lot of fun. I think if you come to this wanting to see, like, what if Tim Burton actually made a cult movie? I just wish he had made it at an actual cult movie scale. I think that might have worked a little better. Like, this is sort of like a fairly obvious financial disaster, and he could get all these people, and he did it. And it kind of adheres to what Tim Burton's style became, which is like, well, I can do all this. I'm like, well, just because you can do it doesn't mean you need to do it this badly. Although I don't think this is like a bad movie. I think it actually sort of works in all of its kind of faults and stuff. And it is a lot of fun. It's a fun watch. Like, I remember having a lot of fun watching it. Rewatching it, I was like, man, I remember going back to this, and now it like feels sort of quaint and stuff. But I still have a fondness for this film. And maybe I can't shake it. Maybe that's my own personal biases. But I think it works in terms of like a sci-fi that was around at the time that was jokey and sillier. It's just, I think it alienates people because had it been done with like a cult movie audience, maybe been a little silly, or let Joe Dante direct it or something, this might have worked a little better. Like, Martin Short doesn't get much to do, unfortunately. Like, I wish he kind of had more fun, but there's so many gags and so many silly things that stay in my memory. Maybe I'm almost too used to it, like a CD I played too many times, which I definitely watched this movie out, because it was kind of my sensibility at the time. And I think it was kind of like that cartoon, silly, Bugs Bunny, Coyote Roadrunner kind of thing going throughout it. Yeah, maybe there should have been a better director. Maybe this could have been done better. Maybe it could have been a cooler stop motion. All those things. I am happy with what we got, but I understand in terms of the context of both its release at the time, Tim Burton's filmography. Yeah, it doesn't stack up as well, and it's like the first kind of lesser film in a really good run. But I still have a fondness for it. I still remember being 13, not being able to shut the fuck up about it, and I remember everyone coming back from Christmas break and telling me, like, yeah, I kind of overhyped Mars Attacks a bit, but I still don't care. I will overhype Mars Attacks all I want. I think it's better than a lot of his filmography that came after. Ed Wood, and I think he did try to make a cult movie, and it sort of got away from him by still wanting to be a huge director. Maybe it shows that Tim Burton shouldn't be a huge director. He should be a weird cult movie director. And if he stayed within those reins, maybe he'd be something really interesting. But I still have fun with this movie. Maybe it's flawed. Maybe it gets rid of Jack Black too quick. Maybe it's cool that Lucas Haas gives a terrible speech at the end and falls in love with Natalie Portman. I don't know. This is a fun movie. This is a fun movie to me, and a film I look back on fondly, and probably liked for no good reason other than I was into a lot of dorky shit. And I think Mars Attacks is a total movie for dorks, and for everyone else, they want to get out of the room because dorks smell weird. And I think Mars Attacks emanates that dork smell so proudly and pungently that you guys should probably leave the room. You don't want to be here, and you know, we should probably shower a bit more, but we're too busy having fun appreciating this weird ass crap, and that frankly is Mars Attacks. So if you've seen Mars Attacks and you would like to talk about it, then comment below in the comments and subscribe if you would like to. And this was a winner of the Patreon movie review vote. If you would like for me to review a movie of your choice, then click on the link below and pledge, and maybe I'll be reviewing your movie next month.